I hate the overuse of the word trauma, but maybe there was some trauma there, some adverse childhood experiences, right? Some things that weren't the best. And that's not an excuse, but I think that shaped my development in those years and kind of led me to, start the hiding early, right? Because I had a parent that I didn't want anyone to know that, that was the home life I went home to. So everything was a secret. And I think that's when necessarily it wasn't the addiction itself. It was learning the behaviors associated with it, the hiding, the secretiveness, not letting people in because, you're embarrassed. This monkey on your back that you're carrying around that
absolutely,
no one can find out.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Neff Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stephan Neff. Today's another fantastic day for an interview, and I'm very honored to have Kurt Schmidt with me. Kurt, like me, is a connoisseur of addiction, a man who has gone through his trials and tribulations, who has got a master's degree in addiction and in hiding and in all the other beautiful, beautiful attributes that we accumulate as addicts. Having said that, that was then, and now he is a very different man. And I can't wait to hear more about his transformation and his journey from the dark into the light. So, Kurt, welcome to my show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation and see where it takes us.
Exactly. And we both have gone through the darkness, for crying out loud.
Yes.
You certainly, from quite an early stage onwards, you learned to escape your reality. Tell us a bit about the old Kurt. Tell us a bit about the man who was out there trying to leave a mark on this world in your younger years.
Sure. For me, my issues and really my substance use really, like many, started when I was pretty young. I grew up in a family that was what I considered normal and normal for the most part,
Define normal.
I'm in
normal,
yeah,
normal people scare me normally.
So normal in my eyes. Yeah. So normal was big. So I grew up, I'm in the United States. I grew up in Missouri. Large kind of Catholic family, and Catholic families, there's a big, at least in my normalcy and the normal I'm used to, there's usually a lot of drinking that goes on at those family functions. And for me growing up, that was kind of the norm. And I kind of saw that as just the acceptable behavior. And it wasn't anything off-putting in the sense because, my parents, my aunts and uncles, everybody, had professional lives. They kind of they had normal jobs. I guess what you would define as somewhat successful, kind of middle class family growing up, just, normal. I grew up going to Catholic schools. But for me, just being in that environment and seeing that, starting early was me and my cousins and at family functions sneaking off, drinking beers at the age of 12 or 10, or going on hunting trips and doing the same thing. And so the thing was, I knew right away once I started that, hey, this was for me, like this felt great. And I felt like, it changed something inside of me where, I always struggled with maybe self-confidence or thought I didn't fit in when I did fit in. And I think you hear that theme a lot of times in people's stories, and, that starting with drinking, it kind of calmed those nerves, right? It made me feel like I fit in. It made me feel more social, and it, like all of the above, it was like more of that,
Exactly.
And then over time, that progressed into other things, and, you can only imagine, and I'm sure we'll kind of dive into some of that, but, it progresses just like the nature of addiction is. It's a progressive disease, right? Like it keeps going until you make a change. And it doesn't end well for most people. Yeah.
Well, we've got three outcomes, isn't it? It's either in recovery, in jail, or dead. I mean, these are really the three options ultimately where it comes down to. And yeah, I mean, active addiction to really be out there. I call it suicide in installments. So you just keep chipping away until your body is such a wreck that simply the body gives up, or you give up.
Yeah.
And
I, later on in my life, I got to the point where, besides death, all those things were, a part of my story. And, not just me individually going through my own experiences and my own recovery and journey. I had my father struggled with it, and, he passed away 2 years ago from that. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. But it's a terrible way to go, and it's a miserable way to go. And, it's sad because some people don't get it, and, having people in my life that had been through similar situations that really helped me on my path, kind of gave me some hope that, hey, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and some people don't have that opportunity. And it's, that's kind of my mission today, is to help people, inspire people to make some changes.
And it's so hard because addiction, certainly when it comes to alcohol, 95% of people who drink very dangerously will be in complete denial. They completely say, no, me, I'm just a social drinker. John over there, now look at him. I mean, he is. And we surround ourselves at the time of active addiction with other addicts so that it is all normal. And we make jokes about alcohol. It's wine o'clock, or how do you call a meal without alcohol? Breakfast, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Funnily
Not
enough,
for me.
Yeah, well, touché. And funnily enough, people who don't drink don't make jokes about alcohol. So actually, for me nowadays, when I sit in a clinic and assessing patients for their surgery and for anesthesia, if I sometimes you for Christ's sake, you can't bullshit a bullshitter. So we often recognize brothers and sisters a mile away. So I often make a funny joke like that, and if I then get something back, well, okay, that's already confirming my suspicion there. So we're in full denial there. How long were you in denial? Or did you recognize that you were in trouble?
So, I always knew it was a problem. And I knew kind of in high school, I think, that's when I recognized, like, hey, this, if it wasn't one substance, it was another, right? I don't think I was physically addicted to anything in high school, but I realized, hey, this one drug is great. This other one's great for this other thing. Alcohol is great with all of them, so, and then, so for me, it wasn't necessarily about realizing it was a problem. I knew it was a problem, but I didn't have one particular thing that was like, oh, I had to have this until I really went off to college. And, alcohol, among other things, but alcohol has always been the constant, that I struggled with. But it really progressed in college to the point where, physically, I was addicted.
But you were dependent on it, basically. So if you were not to have it, you ended up in trouble. Your body was saying, "Oi, I don't like that." But having said that, I mean, you chose the right career path. You became a chef, isn't it? So, come on, talk about a wet work environment, okay?
Oh gosh, yeah, that was I look back on that, and I'm still so passionate about cooking, and have always been since growing up. But that decision, when I really look back on it, was highly influenced by my substance use. I knew at the time I had just graduated college, my undergraduate degree I went to Purdue University here, and barely made it through. I mean, barely. And, got home, didn't have any job opportunities lined up. That was a really tough time in the economy. And even if I did have any, I'm sure I would have squandered it away, given where I was at in my life. And so I decided to go to culinary school. And, I graduated from there. There were some incidents that happened during culinary school where, I probably shouldn't have been in class, and got called out for it.
Right.
Right. The tough thing in culinary school is, classes start at 4, you got to be there at 5 a.m. because, your first class is at 5 a.m. and you're baking or you're making stocks and those things you have to start first thing in the morning. And so, the culture of even like some of the other classmates was like, hey, this is like, we just went to bed not too long ago, or even if we did go to bed and now we're in class,
exactly
doing that. So it was definitely didn't help my addiction, if not it, contributed to it, but it was definitely not the right path for someone that needed to pursue recovery. It definitely fueled my addiction and ultimately got me to the point where, I was in pretty bad shape with my health, physically. My body was shutting down. And, that's kind of what led to my first attempt to really get some help and get some support.
Body shutting down, let me guess, and the liver was no longer too happy. Can you remember your liver function levels?
They were, so the first time I went to treatment, the first time I detoxed. So to me, there's a big distinction there, detox and treatment. So there are places here in the US where you can just go physically detox and there might not be an aftercare or like an inpatient residential program.
I see.
So I had multiple attempts at that, but I think at the worst, my liver counts were approaching the thousands for like even more. And then I think it was my triglyceride levels. You're probably more familiar with this as a doctor, but one of the doctors showed me a vial of my blood and half of it was, this gel-like substance and the like other half was blood.
Cool way of showing you. Okay. No, it's so often enough. I remember my first day at rehab, and it was sort of, we had an intake of 3 girls and me, and we sort of were sitting around not knowing what to do, deers caught in a headlight, and you talk, and it soon becomes this kind of, hey, what's your liver function? But so where's the best place to hide a bottle? And it's just these weird conversations come out when you actually meet amongst people who have been hiding and now suddenly are coming out. So there you go. So I remember that discussion, and I was nowhere close to record levels, but still, I don't know how far away I was down the line had I continued on my path.
Right. And I think it affects different people differently. Some, even in my work today and work in, clinical work and things like that, I have clients that came in that are 30 years old that self-report that they don't drink. They drink a lot or they use other substances, but not to the extent as some of the older clients I work with. And, they've had a stroke or something, like it's major. And so it just depends on the person. I think genetics may play a part in that. but I
Absolutely.
think it depends. And
Oh, you're so
I
right.
was.
Sorry,
Yeah,
brother. Sorry, we've got that mild delay in the line. So I want to talk, you want to talk. Ladies first. Come on, you go for it.
No, and I was just gonna say, I even had some jaundice at that time where I was
Right.
starting to get yellow. I mean, it was pretty bad.
It's amazing, isn't it? We are all so different. And yes, there are 12, 20 genes that are linked potentially to addiction, to alcohol use, or an alcohol use disorder, shall I say. Having said that, only because you have got those genes does not necessarily mean that you become an alcoholic. It's just a kind of a handicap with which you are playing ultimately. It is all about the epigenetics. So genetically, yes, you might have a predisposition, but epigenetically, what then happens on top of that? Now, the soup that comes flowing over your nuclei, over your genes, that's what matters. And that soup is typically trauma. That soup is typically, there are other root causes there that then bring out the alcoholic among us, or within us, shall I say. When it comes to sort of root causes, so whilst you probably have had a bit of a genetic predisposition, just based upon the story from your family, tell me, with hindsight, were there other factors that played in that were maybe triggering you reaching out for the bottle? Initially, it was the trying to fit in, trying to raise your confidence. It's all that the teenager kind of theme there. But then later on, what made you keep going?
Yeah. So to answer the first part, I think growing up, it wasn't just being exposed to it. You nailed a lot of it. I think a huge part of addiction is genetics, but environment plays a huge role. If you're not in the environment and you have the genetics, you're less likely to, follow through on that path. For me, growing up, watching my dad struggle with alcoholism, and it kind of got worse during my middle school, high school years. And I was alone a lot with him at that time because my mom was traveling for work, and it was just me and him. My sister, who I love, I mean, she's 5 years older, so there was kind of an age gap at that age. She was going off to college, she wasn't home, so it was just me and my dad. And I saw the drinking progress, and I saw the different person he would become when he drank. And those experiences for me weren't always the best. And I'm not here to, say anything negative. What happened. But I know that alcohol was the root of a lot of those decisions he made, and maybe some of the things I went through growing up. And I understand now, looking back, that that wasn't him, right? That was the addiction. And he did the best he could with how he grew up and how he was raised, but that shaped a lot of, I think that shaped a lot of where I went with my addiction, and, probably led to a lot of unresolved. I hate the overuse of the word trauma, but, maybe there was some trauma there, some adverse childhood experiences, right? Some things that weren't the best. And that's not an excuse, but I think that shaped my development in those years and kind of led me to, start the hiding early, right? Because I had a parent that I didn't want anyone to know that, that was the home life I went home to. So everything was a secret. And I think that's when necessarily it wasn't the addiction itself. It was learning the behaviors associated with it, the hiding, the secretiveness, not letting people in because, you're embarrassed. This monkey on your back that you're carrying around that,
Absolutely.
no one can find out. And so you take all those things that I just talked about, and then now, I have my own problems and I've already learned all those behaviors. And so it was just easy to like carry those over
Touche.
and, hide my own addiction. And it's just, we see that kind of the cycle of like family addiction,
exactly.
the family environment. And there's got to be one person that breaks that cycle,
Exactly.
and it's affected my family for generation. But I hope I answered that question, because
Very, very well.
I think you asked a little bit about trauma. Yeah.
Oh, hell yes. And again, you've given me so much ammunition here. As adult children of alcoholics, we have got our own burden, because our behavior was changed. If you look statistically, we are far less likely to be trustful to others because our promises have been broken so many times. Yeah, sure, we're going to play ball later in the park. Yeah, right. Those kind of things. You learn very early on certain set of behaviors. You very quickly put masks up. You will not be innocent walking in, because you never know how daddy will behave. If he's a happy drunk or an angry drunk, all those kind of things. So there is a certain set of behaviors that are ingrained very, very early on, and a set of core beliefs that are absolutely royally fucked up from an early stage on. So no two ways around that. And I love what you said about the trauma. We are nowadays, as we are talking here, 2024, I think there is very much an overuse of the word trauma, and people creating identities with their trauma. Nearly a way of living. And it sounds negative, but there are a lot of psychological studies who are looking into that and are coming out with interesting results along these lines. Nevertheless, we all have gone through shitty circumstances, and they will continue throughout our lives. No two ways around it. And they will be triggers. They will be challenges that maybe we as addicts are not so great in overcoming, at least originally. Later on, fast forward to nowadays, you are such a different man, Kurt. You have changed. You are resilient. You are a man who has transformed. But how did that happen? And here you were basically escaping your reality, left, right, and center. And your reality was that of actually creating more problems with the drinking and with the using. So your health was at the brink. How did things change? Your detox, well, that worked for a few days, and then what changed?
So to circle back, when I talked about detox and going to treatment, that was 16 years ago. So that there's been a bunch of things in between then and now, and multiple attempts at trying to get healthy. And I will say this, there's no one path to recovery. And I think what happened for me is, in my early 20s, at my first attempt to really, and it wasn't even really my choice at that point, I was kind of dropped off, but that was like the seed that was planted, right? That gave me the first taste of, hey, there's a lot of other people struggling with this issue, and there's people that have been successful navigating recovery. And, that gave me an opportunity to get my first year clean, right? Clean of all substances. That was like the first time I've ever had a year.
Wow.
And during that year, I, did some 12-step worked with a sponsor, kind of did everything I was supposed to do. And, whatever happened, nothing really happened, but, I got to the point where I was comfortable again. And I was like, all right, well, I have a year. I could probably go drink again. I just won't do those other things, right? And so that was kind of the cycle, and I will say this, I quit using drugs, in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
And really I didn't go back to drugs ever. And I was a daily drug user.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of drugs. And I never went back to those. But alcohol was that thing that always just kind of was ever present. It was there and it was acceptable. And I could convince myself and rationalize that, hey, you had a year, you could probably have a couple drinks. And, before you know it, I'd just be back in the same pattern.
Oh,
and
exactly.
what didn't help me was that during that time, in my mind, I was able to manage the drinking. I was working, I was doing okay. I was actually getting promoted. Now, granted, this is kind of like my late 20s. I would get promoted at work, but then there would be some red flags where people would be like, hey, have you been drinking? And I wasn't drinking in the morning, but I would smell like it from the night before.
Oh, yeah.
And so there were these things that would pop up. And again, going back to earlier, the secrecy and the hiding and the monkey on my back, it was always, walking into situations and being like, do I smell like booze? Or is someone going to find out that, I was out last night or whatever it may be. And so like, from the outside looking in, my life was okay. I was kind of progressing, and fast forward to where I'm at today is, there were a lot of attempts at getting better, and there were a lot of attempts where I'd string some time together and feel like I was doing well, and then the rationalization would start where I'd convince myself, hey, you can do this thing, you can just moderate, and you'll be okay. And I tried to set limits, and the nature of disease is it's progressive, right? And it was progressive, and every time it got bad. It was just the same result, just maybe a different location. Maybe I was living somewhere different,
Right.
But it was always the same thing. Until I finally, you asked, how did I get to where I'm at today? I think a big part of that was watching my father go through what he went through. I had been sober at the time for a few years when he got really sick. And, I look back on that situation, and, I kind of view it as it could have went two ways, right? It could have went really bad, and I could have used that as an excuse to go back and make, poor choices, or I could use that as kind of a springboard to just strengthen my recovery. And I chose to do that because I'm a parent now. I have two beautiful daughters, they're 9 and 7. And I never want to put them in that situation where they have to see that or go through that. And how I got to where I'm at is I want to be the role model for them. So when they get married one day, that they see me, they look at me and be like, oh, I want to marry a strong man like that, like my dad, that's protects me, that's there for me, that loves me. And if I choose to drink or use substances, I'm not going to be that person. And I think there's a lot of talk in the recovery community, oh, you can't do it for someone else. But for me, I do it for myself, but my family's a big part of that. And so that is what keeps me going. And, it could change tomorrow, but the thoughts of going back to that life, I mean, today, they don't even cross my mind. I'm so far removed from that, and I don't label myself as that anymore. But yeah, that's how I got to where I'm at. Plus, a lot of hard work, a lot of, for me, a lot of exercise, a lot of weightlifting, a lot of being of service, taking care of myself, just the basics, sleep, eat well, physically, all the above.
And we are calling it the basics, yet this is actually such a different concept for someone who's in active addiction, but also for many other people out there who maybe are not drinking dangerously. Our modern lifestyles are not very conducive to actually being functionally healthy. It is if you just take the surrogate marker of obesity within the American population, you've reached way beyond 50% in the United States, and many other countries are just as bad. So that is one example of a marker where we see that our society is really crumbling, where our individual healths and lifespans are changing to the worse. It was now the first year that the lifespan has actually reduced. Now, you could argue that COVID has maybe played a bit into that, etc. But now I think the standard American diet has more to do with our health span on lifespan than actually COVID. So I think the reality is what you're saying is so important. You have taken action. You have decided to live your life with intention, and you were no longer floating around like a cork on a stormy sea surface. No, you were going out there and taking action in the right way. And for that, you surrounded yourself with people who were actually supportive of that, who you could draw upon, who you could communicate with, who understand you, who are not putting pressure on you. I'm on just one drink, it's okay, who, that kind of bullshit. These kind of so-called old friends. You ditch them. And that's all takes a hell of a lot of insight. It takes action. It takes leadership. And you showed all that. You showed integrity, being defined as doing the right thing when no one is watching. And that is cool. You did that. And it's not easy. None whatsoever. So kudos to you. And I love what you say. It's not just one decision. It's not just one experience, one aha moment, one little thing. You don't go once to the gym, lift a few weights and say, hey, I'm healthy now for the rest of my life. And your transformation is amazing. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that you said a really important point is, for a lot of people, it's not just a one-time thing. It takes many times and multiple attempts to get better, whatever that looks like for the individual. There's no one path. And I think there's a stat floating around out there that most people, it takes 4, 5, 6 times before they really get it. And so I look at all those chances or those opportunities to get better, almost as little seeds that were planted. And when I look back, I'm like, oh, I met this person. This person came to see me in the hospital when I was basically dying, who I had never met before, and he was part of a local 12-step program, heard I was in a hospital, came and saw me. That changed my life, so it's like little things like that. But I still, after that situation, I mean, I still went out later on in my life, but it's those types of things that, I look back on and, for me, like my faith and, as a part of my story, it wasn't always there, but I realized those people were put in my life at that time to really guide me to where I'm at today. And like today, I feel like I'm where I need to be, and I wouldn't be here if all those other things didn't happen to me, And if you would have asked me that, 7 years ago, there's no way I could have wrapped my head around that. But, it's the truth, I think things happen for a reason, even though we may not see it at the time. And, I think I'm where I need to be. But to your point, the hardest part for a lot of people is cutting people out of their life that don't serve them, and that's what I did. And, you know, I don't try to convince anyone to make changes or do something they don't want to do. And I'll always be here to support them. But, you know, understanding that, you know, my health and wellness is number one, because if it's not right, then I can't be a good father, good husband, son, brother, boss, whatever it may be, you know.
And it takes leadership, and you, in order to become a strong leader, you need to make the wrong decisions. So congratulations for failing so many times, because with every failure you learn something. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn, and I like that so much. And we are living in a society still where failing is considered to be an absolute awful thing. And if my inner critic is really, really good in telling me, you're a failure, who are you? You know, between imposter and failure, he has got some really cool ideas. Yet it is in my failures where I have learned the most. We have afterwards, through post-traumatic growth, I have expanded so beautifully. Yet, as you say it, when you're in the midst of it, oh, bloody hell, I could have done without that trauma. I could have done without that challenge, without that. But yeah, I mean, trauma comes in layers, healing comes in layers. And I think if we can just tell people out there, hey, there is hope and there is help. I think these two messages, that was something I could in the past, I didn't know, I didn't see. And my core beliefs were warped. I didn't believe that there is help from anyone out there.
Yeah, and there is a lot of help out there, and you just got to look for it. And I think one of the biggest challenges today, which, you know, my kids will have to grow up with, is social media kind of paints this picture that everyone's life is great and perfect, and, you know, everyone's on the beach all the time. And so that if someone's not in a good headspace mentally, and, you know, they're viewing that, or they're spending time consuming that information, you know, it makes it really hard for people to find hope, you know. And the reality is, especially working in this field, there are so many people that are struggling that really just need someone there that can understand or be a sounding board, and, you know, maybe has gone through similar experiences. There's a lot of people out there that they just need to talk to, and there is hope. You know, it's not, you just got to seek it out, you know. And that's kind of what led to me starting like what I do today, and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Well, tell us a bit about it, because you have put your money where your mouth is. You walk the walk, don't just talk the talk. You have created Peer Network, and you are living a life of recovery and are modeling it to others. Tell us about that.
Sure. So, you know, I started in the field. I started working in mental health and substance use, you know, probably about 4 years ago. Was looking for a career change. At the time, I had worked in supply chain technology. After, you know, I switched from the food industry to that because I was like, I need to get out of that industry. And long story short, there's a form of support which is all over the world, really. And like, the more I kind of dive into it, the more I learn it's commonplace in different parts of the world, but it's called peer support. And peer support, for those that don't know, and most people haven't heard of it, it's a form of support where people with lived experience, whether it be mental health or substance use, they're in long-term recovery, and they go through training and certification to provide support to people that are going through similar challenges. So really, the foundation of peer support is based on the idea of shared experience, shared and lived experience. You know, talking to somebody who's been there and gone through that situation or a similar situation. And it's not clinical, right? it doesn't require a master's degree or anything like that. It's really foundational based on the shared experience. And so that's how I started in the field. I was trying to make a career change. A good friend of mine here, who's a clinical psychologist, he's awesome. He's like, you should look at peer support. And I had never heard of it. I had been in recovery and looked into it and ended up getting certified here in Missouri and took a job at a local community health organization and started working with drug court, DUI court, and family court clients, providing peer support. And what I noticed was, as soon as someone found out that I had the lived experience and that I had, overcome my own challenges, the walls and the barriers came down. I wasn't providing clinical therapy. I wasn't diagnosing anyone, but I was just talking to them as a person with the training that I had undergone and, applying all that knowledge. But, they would open up more so than they would with their counselors or therapists. And they would tell me that. And so I knew that there was a big opportunity for peer support to help more people, not just in those settings, like a residential treatment center and outpatient program or something like that. Like people in the general public would benefit from talking to a peer who's experienced and has worked in the field for many years. And maybe they're not ready for clinical therapy, or they're looking for something in addition to clinical therapy, and talking to a peer, is super helpful. And there's a lot of research to back that up. I mean, it improves quality of life, reduces ER visits, hospitalizations, increases engagement in treatment. There's a whole variety of benefits to it. And so, that's why I started it's thepeernetwork.com. But, during that time, I was also pursuing a master's in social work so I could be a clinician. So it was kind of like, and I was doing that because traditionally peer support roles are not paid very well, at least here in the US. And it's really hard if you're going to make that a long-term career and you have a family and bills to pay, that most peers end up pursuing other licenses or credentials because it's just not sustainable. So I pursued my master's degree and completed that and started working kind of in a clinical role as a provisionally licensed therapist, but my heart was in peer support. And so I was like, I got to figure something out. I want to figure out how I can do this. I can bring it to more people. And it was kind of one of those almost aha moments where I'm like, I should start a company that does peer support, and through telehealth to make it accessible to anyone, not just going in person to a treatment center. So, that was a great idea on paper, but there's a lot of things I had to look into, can I do this? Is it possible legally? What are the requirements and all that? But, fast forward 2 years, that's where we're at today. We have a team of nationally certified peers here in the US that provide telehealth peer support. So you meet with the same peer consistently. It's not like a crisis hotline where you're calling in, you talk to Joe in the morning and Pam in the afternoon, two different people. It's kind of like a therapeutic relationship, not in the clinical sense, but where you build that same ongoing rapport with your clients and with your peer. And it really helps with accountability and really helps meet people where they're at in their journey with no judgment, stigma. It really breaks down the barriers. So.
May I ask, how do you define the roles of, let's say, a sponsor or a mentor versus a peer?
Yeah, great question. And that comes up a lot. I think, in a sponsor is part of a 12-step program typically, right? So sponsored, from my understanding and my experience, their role is really to walk someone through the 12 steps, and be kind of a sounding board as a coach. and it's usually kind of their way, right? It's the way they did it, and that's how they pass it along to their mentees, which is great, and it helps a lot of people. It was part of my story. You know, I had sponsors, and typically a peer goes through training, and the training varies. You know, here in the US, each state's got their own training, and then there's higher levels of training that are national certifications. And typically the foundation of like a peer support training is motivational interviewing, like strength-based coaching. There's a lot of training around boundaries, ethical considerations, mandated reporting, just kind of the things you almost learn in a higher ed or postgraduate degree for clinical work, like in social work, without assessing, diagnosing, things like that. So, and then you said a sponsor, a peer, and a mentor or coach.
Yep.
So
because these are all sort of, you know, things out there, yet even people who are working within the field, I don't think have got clear set boundaries or clear set ideas. What is one role? What is the other role, etc. So therefore, it's especially for anyone listening out there.
Yes.
How do you distinguish what is what?
Right. And so hopefully I just gave the distinction a little bit between a sponsor and a peer, but so if I could just break it down in simplest terms, like a therapist or a clinician, they're going to have a postgraduate degree, so a master's degree in whatever field, whether it's counseling or clinical social work or whatever. A sponsor is, you know, using their own personal experience and what they think is best, you know, to help walk a sponsee through the 12 steps. And then I think a peer, you know, they go through training and certification that teaches them kind of the foundations of motivational interviewing, which is really about helping clients elicit like change talk, identify what their goals are, figure out how to get them there. And also while keeping in mind like ethical considerations, understanding what boundaries are appropriate in a professional setting, which sometimes that can get blurred in the 12 steps, I feel like, and you hear about that sometimes. So it's really just, I think training is the difference, you know, is the big thing. Like, for example, our team members, all of our peers are nationally certified, meaning they've all had 3,000 hours of supervised work experience in the field.
Oh,
Most of them,
wow.
have been doing it, you know, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. So they've been doing it a long time.
Wow.
And that's not typical of peer support specialists, but
I betcha.
So that's kind of the difference, and it's not for everyone. And I think, you know, peer support is not a replacement for working with a clinical therapist. But a lot of times what it can do, first of all, it can help family members, which people often don't think about. So if a family member has a loved one struggling with mental health or substance use, a lot of our peers have gone through that. And they work with families to help them kind of navigate that and how to support their loved one. And, you know, whether that's setting boundaries or just connecting them to resources and things like that. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. Oh, thank you. You answered that really, really well. And I was actually not aware of the extent of expertise that is present in the people that you work with. Wow, that 3,000 hours.
Yeah,
they have done it once or twice. Okay.
Yeah, and that requires continuing education too. So it's not just a one and done thing where peers are just certified and that's it. You know, they have to go through ongoing training to maintain their certifications. And, you know, some of our peers, one of them's, you know, in the master's program. So there's just a variety of, you know, life experience,
Beautiful.
other wellness coaching that they do, things like that. So
beautiful. And it is, I mean, healing and growth comes not just from one single intervention, not just from one single thing. There are times when you need a very clinical team to help you detox
Yes.
in the first few days. So it's just you need certain specialties that come on board at various stages in your growth, in your healing. Also,
Yeah.
not every story is unique. So therefore, also each and every one of us will go through different needs at different times in their progress. I had I had far more PTSD and far more trauma impact than I ever allowed it to be known, even known to myself. And that only came out 5 years, 6 years ago. And prior to that, I had completely reframed things in my mind. And I was no longer the victim. I was the survivor. I was the look at me, I'm the man, I'm Rambo. And all that shit only came out, coincidentally. And it was then that I needed a specific help. In this case, it was a hypnotherapist who helped me dramatically reduce the symptoms of the PTSD. And it just so happened then. But prior to that, I had other people who helped me with nutrition initially, or, those kind of things. So a team will change over the years. But it is said that if you surround yourself with millionaires, 6 millionaires around you, it's very difficult for you not to become financially wealthy. If you surround yourself with 6 painters, then sooner or later you're going to pick up a pencil or a brush, and you'll give it a shot. And I think it's the same with recovery. You need to find a team, a power team, where you are the dumbest member in the team. And only then will you be able to grow. You can try it yourself, but you're nothing more than a chimpanzee hitting a keyboard and thinking, ooh, that's nice. What's that? Oh, that's alcohol. I see. How about trying to find people who can understand you, who have been in your situation, and who can now guide you towards healing opportunities, treatment modalities, any kind of things. Because when we're in active addiction, we're blind. We're in darkness. We don't think that there's hope, that there's help. But your people are basically saying the absolute opposite. No, on the contrary, it is virtually guaranteed that you make progress. How fast that progress is and how many steps back there are. Well, that's another story.
Right. Yeah, and I think you nailed it. It does take a team, and peer support is just one part of that. And just to be clear, to your, like you said, to your audience, there are risks. Sometimes medical interventions needed, right? Like if there's a detox, things like that. Peer support does not replace any of those things.
Exactly.
One thing it can help with for people that are struggling, I think even in active addiction, I'm sure you'll put some disclaimers out, like don't quit drinking cold turkey if you're drinking a lot, like things like, right? I can speak to that. That's another story I have, but it can help talking to a peer at any stage of the process. So a lot of times people are really reluctant, especially in active addiction. Maybe they're hesitant to go to treatment or to meet with a clinician or to see a doctor or to see a psychiatrist, and peer support can be really helpful in eliciting change for people that are at that pre-contemplation stage, because they talk to somebody, that person kind of models the behavior that, that maybe they want to get to, or they see, hey, this person did it, and they're professional and they know what they're talking about. And you can do that through other programs like 12 steps and things like that. But I think peer support's different, like I explained earlier. But So it can be part of the process anywhere. It's great for ongoing support, but it really can help build motivation and build confidence in people to kind of seek the next steps. And peers, and I can say this because I am one, I continue to maintain all that, but we're really good at connecting people to the right resources, whether that's getting, to doctors, to treatment centers, because we all have this giant network of people that in the recovery community that, hey, we can, help point you in this direction, or, help, maybe you need to just see a doctor to get some blood work done because you're stressing out. Like, how do you just get people to just take those little steps? And that's, I think a peer can be instrumental, no matter what part of the process that is.
100% agreed, Kurt. Oh, Kurt, you're an amazing man. Thank you very much for the work that you're doing out there. Thank you very much for being so humble and so authentic and sharing your story, because it's that authenticity that disarms people, that lets them drop their mask, because they realize that you have been in their shoes and that you're now on a different path, quite a bit ahead of them, and that makes you a leader. And that is beautiful what you have created there. So thank you so much. Tell us, if people want to find you or want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Sure. If, they can learn more about just our organization at www.thepeernetwork.com. There's some great resources on there. All of our team is on there. You can check out their bios. As far as just finding me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Obviously you don't want to send any personal health information or anything like that, but professional connections, you can connect with me on there. I'm just at Kurt Schmidt. You can find me there. And then on Facebook and Instagram, we have a peer network page, but, we just kind of post some uplifting stuff on there day to day and just kind of motivational things. But
Beautiful.
Really, I would say the best way is just check out our website, and you can also call us. Our number's on there, and we're happy to answer any questions or anything like that, or point you in the right direction if we're not the best fit. So,
and right now the right direction is down there. Look into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast, because you find all of Kurt's information down there on all the links. Kurt, thank you so much for being a guest on my show. I had a great time. I learned a lot about peer networking, and it is an amazing modality of providing that know-how, that kind of connection, that ability to reach out. And I love it that you guys are in many cases the candle in the darkness, or sometimes the torch, sometimes the lighthouse in the darkness of someone else. And that's beautiful. There is, since chemical addiction is at least affecting 1 in 4, some people say 1 in 3, there's a huge need out there for us to break down walls, to pull down masks, to live as leaders by being authentic and being honest about our own experiences, which then hopefully plants the seed in others to also stop hiding and address the root causes of their escaping of their reality, and in turn change their lives towards the better. And I'm sure we can change the world. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, brother.
Thank you. And there's a gap in resources for mental health and substance use, and this is one of those bridges to fill some of those gaps. So
Brilliant.
I encourage everyone, just reach out. There's people out there that are willing to help. So
brilliant. Good. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm sure your trajectory will be interesting, and let's see where you have grown to in a year or 2 years' time. So, and you guys out there, look after yourself and live with passion. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.